Hello, my name is Judy Talamoni, and I'm doing this video in response to Ben Shapiro's video, which is titled Ben Shapiro Exposes Lies of Black Lives Matter. And in that video, Ben Shapiro explained some his perceptions about Black Lives Matter. Let me preface this first by saying that I absolutely believe that Ben Shapiro has the First Amendment right to free speech and the right to express his own perceptions of Black Lives Matter and lives of African Americans in America today. I just want to offer my different perspective and my own statistics and analysis to prove that his statistic and analysis were taken out of context. Were taken out of context, so they're actually inaccurate. And some of the statements he made in comments, actually, I don't know where he got those statement comments from because I couldn't find any truth to them or any evidence or fact to lead to whether they were true or not. So Ben Shapiro had a very negative viewpoint of Black Lives Matter. Ben Shapiro thinks that their demands are unreasonable or unrealistic, and he doesn't understand what they're fighting for. He read on the website that they want the immediate arrest of Darren Wilson, who shot and killed Michael Brown, and he also read on the Black Lives Matter website that they want to decrease funding for police at the local, state, and federal level. But I read the whole website and I could not find that on there. But after I read the whole website, basically what they're asking for is just to be treated fairly and equally and not to be harassed by police officers, because it is true African Americans are disproportionately targeted by police officers, and I have statistics, I have the current statistics and analysis to prove that. So I'm just going to go over some of the things Ben Carson alluded to in his own comments and give my different perception of that. And Ben Shapiro said that Black Lives Matter is the single greatest threat to black men who want to survive to be old men. I don't know what the connection is. Black Lives Matter is very supportive of other African American men and all African American men, and they have that movement so that African American men, they can go to the Black Lives Matter and they'll get support there. I don't know of anyone that was hurt by the Black Lives Matter. I don't know any names or videos or any documentation of any black men that were a threat from the Black Lives Matter. So I don't believe that's a fair or a real accurate statement. Unless Ben Shapiro, you have video or documentations or names of African American men that were a threat from Black Lives Matter, but I don't see any threat at all. I believe that Black Lives Matter strongly supports their African American men. It would never hurt them. Also, he said that Black Lives doesn't believe in Black Lives Matter. Yeah, Black Lives Matter really cares for their African American communities and supports everyone, even in a worldwide global. They have many chapters in other countries, and I think they have 50 chapters in the United States. These chapters are there to help support any of their African American people, to support them in anything they need legally or financially. They're there to help support their community. And then also you said that Black Lives Matter started because of the fully justified killing of thug Michael Brown by Darren Wilson in Ferguson, murdered Brown not for racist reasons. The facts and evidence mean nothing to them and their allies. Okay, so let's talk about the Michael Wilson Brown shooting. I watched that shooting from different angles, and what you see is Michael Brown and his friend walking down the residential street, and Darren Wilson pulls next to them and said, "Hey, you're jaywalking." And I'm thinking, like, It's a residential street. Everybody walks on a residential street. I walk on my residential street every day. So why you would hassle people for jaywalking on a residential street? Anyway, so Michael Brown does come up to the car, and him and Darren get in a little struggle, where then Michael Brown runs away, and then Darren comes out of his car and shoots him a couple times. Michael Brown turns around, he grabs his stomach, and he kneels over with his head towards the ground, his face towards the ground, and Darren Wilson shoots him several times. And this is also corroborated by the coroner, who in her autopsy said that Michael Brown sustained bullet wounds at the top of his head and the top of his shoulder, indicating someone that was bending over. So if Michael Brown has his hands around his stomach and he's bending over, I don't see how he's at any threat to Darren Wilson. Darren Wilson was in no threat or imminent danger when Michael Brown is 20 feet away, kneeling over. So I don't know why he had to shoot him. I mean, he could have walked up there and tasered him, but shooting like several shots at him, a person that's kneeling down with their hands around their stomach, I think justified a trial or a court for manslaughter for Darren Wilson. That's my perception and viewpoint of the whole video. And also, Ben Shapiro, I don't think you don't know anything about Michael Brown. What do you know about Michael Brown to call him a thug? And then you're also speaking ill of the dead. It's not nice to speak ill of the dead. And also, that's very offensive to his family, who's just lost their son, to call their son a thug. I would think, Ben Shapiro, that is your unconscious bias to call Michael Brown a thug. And you don't even know him or anything about him. All you know, he's a black man that got killed by a white officer, and you're saying it's a justified murder. And then also, no murder is justified. No homicide is justified. Somebody gets killed, it's not justified. There's no justification when somebody dies. So that's like an oxymoron to say it's a justified murder by a thug. So I think that's my perception about that. And also, you said the facts and evidence mean nothing to them and their allies. Actually, they do actually mean a lot. We have it on video, the whole episode on video, and that's the evidence we need, everything we need to make the case. And also, our allies, that would mean black community allies, would be the Democrats and other people in America that support the Black Lives Matter. Of course, we view evidence and facts. We do realize that we need those to make a strong case to get justice. And also, Ben Carson said, defending criminals and rioters and lying about police, that's what matters to Black Lives Matter. Okay, I don't think Black Lives Matter has ever given a false statement about police or lied about police that I know of. I've read all their tweets, and Ben Shapiro, if you have a video or documentation or a tweet or something to where a Black Lives Matter has lied about police, or they have defended criminals, and you're saying they defend criminals and rioters. I only Black Lives, if you're talking about how they support their own African American men that are in prison or are in a court, of course they're going to defend their African American brothers that are in prison for low-level crimes that should not be, non-violent crimes too, that should not be in jail. African Americans are over incarcerated. They represent only 6% of the population, but 40% in prison. So what do the Black Lives Matter want? Basically, reading the website, all of it that I've read, what they want is just fairness, to be treated equally, and to be stop being discriminated by police officers. That's what they want, according to their website. Ben Carson said they want a national policy specifically aimed at readdressing the systemic pattern of anti-black law enforcement violence in the U.S. and also to decrease law enforcement spending at the local, state, and federal laws. I read the whole website. I couldn't find that on there. I don't know how long ago Ben Carson read that, but as of today, December 11th, 2017, I haven't found any of those statements on the website, so I can't comment on that whether that's true or not. But I do know it was not on the website when I read it today. Also, to do by fighting the cause, Black Lives Matters, and Democrats get black people killed. Okay, so Black Lives Matter is not really fighting, like literally fighting with the cause. Black Lives Matters is addressing an issue that police officers are racially profiling, which is proven already in several cities. And Chicago is one city where a judge has already ruled that it's unconstitutional to stop people just because they're black, because they have no reasonable cause. So I absolutely believe what this judge says, that they should not be stopping black people just because they're black. They have to have a reasonable cause. This is a real problem in Chicago, where the residents there in their neighborhood are so harassed that they don't like to leave their house because they can't walk freely around without being stopped, frisked, and harassed by white officers. So this is a serious problem they have in their community, and the judge has already addressed that issue. Um, the real threat, the real threat to young black men doesn't lie with white police officers at all. In reality, cops don't over-arrest black crime victims. Reports what match arrests in terms of racial data. Actually, that's totally false, Ben Shapiro. I have the current analysis that proves that African American are over represented for arrest. They're arrested more often, like 20% more often, and the real threat, and their threat was using excessive force and killing some of the African American men that are unarmed and on video with impunity. So I can understand that the black community would be a very resentful and angry, and you feel oppressed when you're not treated fairly and equally in institutions, which they are not treated fairly in the banking. They usually get some subprime loans. Also, in schools are really underfunded, and they don't have really good schools. Is another one. In hospitals, there's an unconscious bias where they either don't have insurance or underinsured, or the doctor has an unconscious bias, and they don't get fair treatment. So so the young black people lie with the white people bosses. In reality, cops don't. Yeah, actually, cops do over arrest black victims. And it's proven in a recent article, a study that I just read. Sentencing among racism is the effect of prior criminal history and other variables, but not race. That's not actually true. In Florida, a judge was reprimanded for giving 25% more sentence, longer and harsher sentences for African Americans, and another judge ruled that unconstitutional. And then Ben Carson said police actually hesitate more often in violent confrontations with black suspects and shoot black suspects less often than white people in similar situations. Actually, this is not true at all, Ben Carson. I don't know where you get this information at all. There's hundreds of videos online showing white officers disproportionately using more excessive force on African Americans, and also using lethal force on African Americans and shooting them. This is why they have riots from. There's been 20 African American men, high profile cases where they were killed and the white officer was not held accountable. And that's the reason why African American community feel a resentment towards the law enforcement. And Ben Shapiro said, the real threat to your young black men lies with other black men. Okay, so this is actually it is true. There's more black on black. Like 90% of black people, men, are killed by other African American men, and the reason for this is because we still live in a segregated society, and we still live in segregated neighborhoods. So when you have an all black community, the only black people live there. African American men are only going to be associated and have relationships or socialize with other African American men because that's who it is in their community. Their community is African American men with other African American men, and because they're together, usually people who shoot somebody else knows the person. So it's because there's black men in the community and there's other black men, and they're more closely have a relationship with them or socialize or associate with each other, and that's why there's more black on black, because that's what is available in their black community. And Ben said murder is the number one cause of black males 16 to 34, and virtually all those murders are committed by other black men. That's true, like you said, because they live in a segregated neighborhood, all black neighborhood. They're going to have only African American associated with African American men, because people who used to shoot each other is somebody you know, and that would be another African American man. And that's all the same with white people. They are shot 83% more by other white people, because in the white community, the white man is only associated and socializing with other white men, and that's why there's a high proportion, because we live in segregated neighborhoods, and the white man is only socializing with the white man, and that's why we have races, black on black, white on white crimes. Black men represent 6% of the population, but represent 40% of the murder victims and the perpetrators. Yeah, that's a high percentage of murder victims and perpetrators. I think this number is a really high number, 40% of murder victims and perpetrators. So if it's 40% of murder victims and perpetrators, I think the actual number is there's 24% black victims, and then 20%, 18% perpetrators. The black murder rate and the white racist Democrats didn't want to police black communities. Black Democrats threw black men in jail for petty crime against whites too, but they did nothing when black men murdered other black men. So Democrats do support Black Lives Matter in the African American community, because Democrats are more they're not like all white like the Republicans are. Democrats are racially diverse group of people. They're usually middle class, lower class, and they're not the Republicans. So the Democrats understand that there is a problem in the African community where they are treated in discriminatory fashion, or they're not treated fairly. So that's what the Democrats support Black Lives Matter, to tell them, we support Black lives by supporting you and your movement to help each other reach justice and fairness in living. Okay, so today, the people that are pushing against policing in the black communities are black racists, like the people like the Black Lives Matter. Well, actually, they're not pushing against policing. It's actually statistics that there's over policing in African American community neighborhoods, because the crime is higher. So there's a lot. The crime would be higher because they're the police officers are pulling over a lot of black people for little possessions of marijuana possession, non-violent crimes, or they go in jail because they can't get bailed out and they get stuck in there because the bail is too high. You can't give a poor person $1,500 bail when they don't have a job and they don't have any money. So I think that's unconstitutional and unfair to give poor people such a high bail amount. But today, the people that are pushing against policing, actually, the Black Lives Matter likes it when the police are around to protect them, but not harass them. So that's what they support police officers, the ones that are acting legally and not using excessive force. They support those officers because in the black community, you will call the police if there's a domestic dispute or violence going on. They rely on their police officers to protect them. So it's not true that Black Lives Matter doesn't want policing in their neighborhood. They're already over policed because they have so many police officers just saturated in their neighborhood, just looking to pull over people and stuff. So that's not really true. The truth is that black communities desperately need more law enforcement. They need basic rule of law so the vacuum isn't filled by gangs. Actually, I don't think it's true. They don't need more rule of law. They already have more rule of law. They're over policed. They have a lot of police, and it's not working. What it's doing is putting more African American men in jail and harassing African American men. There's more police in these neighborhoods, these African American neighborhoods. So the rule of law is not going to work. Only the rule of law can create a safe space for business investment and provides jobs and economic growth. I don't think the rule of law is going to work. If you don't have businesses, you don't have businesses. That just means you're saying that you want more cops. But how is more cops, when it's already over policed, going to have this safe space for business investment, which provides jobs and economic growth? What they need are these poor black communities need is for the government to put in more stores and more businesses to help them, because in a lot of black communities they don't have a grocery store or they don't have a Walmart or a Target to go shopping. They have to go drive out of the city to receive those benefits of shopping in a store. The murdered black racists are leading charge worse for black Americans. It's still the same old white racist Democrats who benefit from the destruction of the white races. Literally, Bernie and Bernie are happy to see black people die if it means winning elections by race baiting. I know Bernie Sanders pretty well. I keep in contact with him. I have never heard him race bait or any Democrat race bait. I watch a lot of C-SPAN about the Democrats, and I keep up with the politics and the politicians, and that is not a narrative I would fit with the Democratic Party, that they do race baiting at the expense of having people killed. Democrats and Bernie Sanders would never say anything race baiting that would hurt an African American community or kill African American people. So I think that's a false perception of yours. The lack of effective criminal justice, and this is more than anything, is the reason for the nation's long-standing plague of black homicides. The lack of effective criminal justice system. What it is, we have a corrupted criminal justice system where you have an all-white jury trying an African-American man when that should be a jury of his peers. And more than likely, an all-white jury, they have an unconscious bias, or they have an implicit bias, and more often than not, they find him an African American guilty, and they give him a harsher and longer sentence. So the criminal justice, to have the lack of effective criminal justice system, and this is more than anything is the reason for the nation's long-standing plague of black homicide. I don't think having the criminal system, justice system is corrupt, and that's not the reason why we have a plaque of black homicides. Is like I said, we have a high rate of homicide between black and black because they live with each other in a black community. That's who they associate with. And a criminal system needs to be reformed because we have private prisons that incentivize the jails to incentivize judges to find guilty verdicts so that they can fill the private jails with men, because they get $70,000 per year for each man. And not only that, when a man is in jail, he works for 23 cents an hour to make aerospace products or products for corporations. Where else? So anyone in the community, if they got paid for aerospace, it would be like $50 to $100 an hour, and they're making 23%. 23 cents an hour, less than $19 a month. So what happens is we have moved segregation from prison, into the prison system, because of the 13th Amendment. Slavery is free except for when they're in jail. That's what it says. So they can kind of treat them like slaves in jail, because that's what the 13th Amendment says. That slaves is illegal to own a slave. Slavery is illegal, except for when confined in a prison. And that's why they make 23 cents an hour, making these expensive aerospace products, or these expensive products for corporations, and major corporations too. So that's another way that the private prisons are profiting from making these parts for large corporations. The rule of law, the rule of law means safety for Black Americans. Black Lives Matter pushes lawlessness. The rule of safety, I told you, is already overrepresented, and it's already over policed in the African American police. African American neighborhoods, they don't need more police. They need more financial help to better their schools. They need better health care, better nutrition. That's what they need. Is they need a strong nuclear family of both mother and father. And the Democratic Party, and they don't push lawlessness. That is totally out of the context. I don't know, the rule of law safely for the Black Americans, but Black Lives pushes lawlessness. I don't know of any incident on video or documented where the Black Lives pushes lawlessness. That would mean you're saying that Black Lives Matter does illegal things or breaks the law. I doubt that they're so high profile that a movement is not going to justify doing illegal behaviors or break the law. I think it's absolutely false. And the Democratic Party, beholden to its divisive sponsors, joins in the crusade for chaos and leaves dead young Black men in its wake. That's absolutely not my perception or viewpoint. I haven't seen any Democrats raise bait or put an agenda to go against the African American community or any African American people. Bishop Pro, if you have video or any documentation or tweets to prove that Democrats leave dead young men in its wake, that's not true at all. If you have one name of one African American that was killed just because of something Democrats said, I really urge you to bring that forward, because that's a serious allegation that Democrats leaves dead young men in its wake. That's absolutely not true. I don't know one incident, and I've never heard that. I'm almost in constant engagement with the political process and what our politicians are doing, especially the Democratic Party and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and our own senators Feinstein and Harris, and I've never heard them say anything that would hurt or kill an African American man. So that is a completely false paradigm that's going on there. What is the uprising seeking to achieve? Well, the uprising is seeking to achieve to stop harassing African Americans and racial profiling African Americans by police department. That's what they want. They feel African Americans. If you really understood African American life, you would understand that they feel oppressed. You live in a poor neighborhood, poor schools, no stores, no jobs. You would feel oppressed and feel resentment. And then on top of it, you have officers that are attacking African American people. This just makes African American people angry, and I would be angry myself if that was my culture or my people being treated like that. It's not useful. It's not useful to riot and looting. This is absolutely true. I've seen the protest of Ferguson was actually pretty peaceful until the officers started shooting several tear gas into the crowd and started pushing them and hitting them with their batons. And then that's when the violence broke out because they became defensive and wanted to fight back, or they were trying to protect themselves. And that's not also African Americans. You have all other races out there the in the riot. I wouldn't call it a riot. I would call it a march, I would call it a march or a protest. A riot is something gives me a negative connotation. So they're not really rioting. They're marching. They were marching peacefully, protesting peacefully. There were African American teenagers who do have risky behaviors that were very disrespectful and broke into the businesses and looted them and burned them. This is unacceptable behavior, and I don't condone it at all, and I believe they should be caught and they should be punished and put on trial for arson or looting or stealing or whatever you want to call it. Yes, if you break into a business and you loot it or whatever, then you're robbing or stealing, and you should be held accountable. And I don't condone it, and I don't like it when people do that, and it's not fair to the businesses. The businesses that there actually is part of their community, so it's actually right. These teenagers should not be attacking their own community businesses, especially when they know the business owners. So that's totally unnecessary. But that happens sometimes when people are so oppressed, and then a death of an African American at the hands of a white man, they get outraged and they get angry, and they get so angry that they use physical force to express their anger. And that's what happens when the people break things or break into businesses, is they're using the physical force to express their anger, which is really not appropriate. But I can't say how they're feeling because I'm not the person in their shoes. So I'm just saying that, a repressed anger comes up and it manifests in a physical manner. You have to release that by either saying something or release that by being physical, and that's where you get into a problem when you have looting or fires at the riots. I'm sorry, not the riot, the protest. And let me say that this is not also an African American thing that happens when a person is killed by a police officer. In Europe, it's a very, very common. Every time a person dies from the hands of a police officer, the whole country, like in Paris, somebody got shot by a police officer, the whole country came out and protested against the police department. In Europe, it is totally unacceptable. They don't accept that, and they have protests every time that a civilian is killed by a police officer. In London, they have these big protests when someone is killed by a police officer, especially in these European countries where they have very, very, very low civilian fatalities and they don't use excessive force. In Europe, they protest in a big, large mass. The whole country comes out to protest the death of a civilian by an officer. So this is not just an African American thing that happens. It happens all over the world where people will protest against police if they kill somebody else illegally, or they're corrupt, or they're using too much excessive force. So Ben Shapiro talked about hands up, don't shoot. I don't remember what his comment was, but he said that was a false narrative. Well, actually, this is true. Hands up, don't shoot. The reason most of these people were killed, African American killed, and most people that are killed, is because the police officer in those cases said they didn't see their hands, or their hands were reaching to their pockets, their hands were reaching out, reaching in, their hands were reaching somewhere, but they couldn't see their hands. So that's why most people are getting killed, because they can't see their hands. So of course they're going to put up their hands and say, hands up, don't shoot. So that's a big revelation to understand the reason why people say hands up, don't shoot, is because police shoot when they don't see your hands. So that's an absolute correct perception and a correct reality in America, that you will be shot if cops don't see your hands, or if they see your hands reaching, you're really going to get shot. More white men killed by police than black men. Actually, this is found false. Well, actually, I'm sorry. Ben Shapiro said more white people are killed by cops than black people. That's actually true, because white people represent 69% of the population, majority of the population. African Americans only comprise 13% of the population, but they're 40% of the civilians dead. So if you put it in proportion, the rate of homicides to the population, actually analysis says that African American men are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by a white officer than a white person, because if you put the proportion of homicide versus the population, then you get the real statistics. This is on. Young black men were again killed by police at a sharply higher rate than other Americans. That's true. Black male aged 15 to 34 was 9 times more likely to be killed than any other American by law enforcement last year, according to the data collected by the counted. They were also killed 4 times the rate of young white men. Police departments are reluctant to collect data of civil rights injuries or deaths of civilians, and will not make public how many civilians were died or killed by cops. Without accurate records, we cannot get to the accurate numbers that's of death and injuries of civilians in the whole nation, because police departments refuse to collect that data and to make that data public. So obviously they know that they have a problem and they don't want to release that. So those are the things that I wanted to comment about that Ben Shapiro had on his video. So we know that American police officers are killing far too many people compared to the police in other developed countries. Even accounting for population size, the frequency with which American police kill civilians is absolutely shocking. Not twice as often or 3 times as often. We're talking about factors of 20 to 70. We need to reform police department that kill people in disproportionate numbers, and reassuring an increasingly suspicious and even a hostile public that police are being held accountable. Well, they don't keep accurate records and are reluctant to show the public their data of injured and killed people. And then Trump, of course, I did not vote for Trump. Trump has a serious mental illness. We know Trump is racist, paranoid, and delusional. He has seriously bad judgment, terrible judgment. He makes his judgment according to his own paranoid, delusional mind, instead of basing it on facts and evidence, like taking us out of the Paris Agreement. We're the only country not involved in the Paris Agreement, and Trump thinks he's the only person that's right. Okay, so Trump had a terrible idea. He wants to give the military surplus to police department. Okay, so when is a police officer going to use a grenade launcher on civilians? When is a police officer going to use a bayonet on civilians? That's outrageous. Absolutely acceptable. We don't want our police officers to be armed with grenade launchers and bayonets and high caliber weapons. This is not a war zone. Those are weapons for war. It's the reason why they're called weapons of war. It's for war. We're not in a war zone. We're not the enemy. We're not the occupied. We can't be treated with grenade launchers and bayonet. That's outrageous. He needs to take that back. Trump is an idiot to even think of giving our police department any of that military weapons. They're already over militarized anyway, because they treat every American as they have a gun, and in most cases They always pull their gun out first, don't take chances, shoot first, ask later. That is the mentality of a U.S. police officer. It's a military style where they treat everyone as an enemy with a weapon. They will shoot first, ask questions later, and shoot unarmed people on video with impunity. Okay, I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but we already know that U.S. police officers in the U.S. are injuring and killing civilians at staggering rates, and it's just getting worse. Last year, 56,000 civilians were injured by police officers. That's an astonishing, staggering, shocking number of people injured by the police. 56,000. I calculated it was about 4,600 people a day are injured by police officers. Over 1,200 civilians were killed by police officers, and it averages out to about 100 people a day die by a police officer. We are 10 times more real to die at the hands of a police officer than a terrorist. And so there's our police officers are way too violent and use excessive force. And they can't say this is just a few officers, because look at the numbers. That's 56,000 civilians and 1,200 civilian fatalities. Those are huge numbers. It obviously shows that there's a problem in the police department. They're using too much excessive force, and they're killing too many people. And to put this in context, we can compare it with police officers in other countries. In Canada, last year they killed 12 civilians. 12 civilians were killed. Okay, in the United Kingdom, 2015 and 2016, zero civilian fatalities. In Paris last year, they had 4 civilian fatalities. In Australia, they had 8 civilian fatalities last year. In Germany, they had 9 civilian fatalities between 2015 and 2016. China has a population 4.5 times of America, only had 10 civilian fatalities. That's 1.4 billion people, only 10 civilian fatalities. And America has only 320 million people. We have 1,200 civilian fatalities. And Japan last year had 0 fatalities. Wales and Scotland had 0 fatalities last year. You can look at these numbers. They're not even in a double digit. They don't even make it into the hundreds. America's into the thousands. You can see the comparison between other police and our police. And what I found out, what jumped out to me the most when I was reading about these other police officers from these other countries, was at a basic, very fundamental level, these police officers actually really cared for their civilians. And during training, they are indoctrinated to be guardians of the citizen, and this made them feel very protective and feel very responsible to ensure the safety of all their civilians. And these police officers will go out of their way to make sure that the civilians are not injured or killed. They will use their skill of soft skills, which is like interpersonal communication, negotiation skills, critical thinking, de-escalation, empathy, kindness, compassion. They have a lot of empathy, kindness, compassion towards their own civilians. We don't see this in our own police department. Our police department has a us versus them mentality. It's them versus us. We're the enemy. They treat us like the enemy to be occupied. And also, these other police departments, some of them don't even have weapons. They don't carry a gun or a stun gun, or a taser. I'm sorry, they don't carry a gun or a taser in several countries, and so this forces them to make. They have to communicate to have the civilian voluntarily comply to reach a peaceful resolution. Where in America, the cops are for some reason they're in a hurry. They always want to get things done. Hurry, put your hands up. Hurry, get down right now. If you don't, I'll throw you down and kick you down. Our cops are way too in a hurry. I don't know what they're in a hurry to do. They should just slow down, take their time, communicate, so you can try to have the civilian volunteer and surrender peacefully instead of using physical force. Our cops use physical force to have us surrender instead of giving us the opportunity to surrender. So that's the reason why there's a high rate of 56,000 civilians injured compared to 1,200 civilian fatalities. That's an outrageous number. And Congress and at the state level, all police officers in the United States need to be reformed and retrained. Our police officers are only trained for 19 weeks. In comparison, in Europe, they get 130 weeks, or they have to have a 4-year degree in policing. So there's a huge difference. They have like 3.5 years more experience and training compared to ours is only 19 weeks for police. The best predictor of crime are broken families, living in a bad neighborhood, young unwed mothers, lack of education, lack of nutrition, lack of after-school program activities like music, art, sports, and other programs that create opportunities. This is really a sad fact that the schools in these black communities are underfunded. They have old books, they're torn. They don't offer opportunities in the high schools, because my kids at the high school, they have vocational training. You can train to be a nurse, you can train in the STEM program, you can train as an engineer. They have trainings and vocational training in in my majority white neighborhood high school. They have a lot of opportunity. They have music, they have art, they have a lot of opportunities. And also the counselor works one-on-one with each student to talk to them about what their plan is in ninth grade. What's your plan? What do you want to do after high school? And they plan that. So my daughter had that when she was in ninth grade, and she knew she was going to go to college and be an engineer. So that the counselor told her, well, you need to really max up on your mathematics and go to calculus. So my daughter did end up taking AP courses, and that fit all the prerequisites she needed for her university, and she ended up getting an academic scholarship for that because she kept her GPA high and she was taking AP courses. She graduated the top 5% in her class, and she got a full 4-year scholarship at Cal State Fullerton. But that was, my daughter had the opportunity and the access for advancement, and she had the support and the resources for her. Stop the Violence marches, neighborhoods and cities across the U.S. Curbing on black crimes. Poor families commit the most crimes. Income disparity, wage gap, unemployment, and underfunded schools. That's what it said. And here's also a list of names when African communities have a march or a protest against one of their African American brothers that was just killed by a white officer, that was held not accountable, found guilty as usual, because what happens is a police officer is investigated by their own police department, and of course they're going to be extremely biased, and they always say not guilty. If a police officer is accused of using excessive force or killing a civilian, they need to be up to investigation by federal agencies, an independent federal agency that's not part of that law enforcement, to give an unbiased investigation into it, and then we could hold more police officers accountable. But when they have protests and marches in black communities, when African men are killed, and this is not just because of Michael Brown from Ferguson. Ferguson was also protesting and marching against all the other African American men that were killed by white officers who got away with murder. And their names were Freddie Gray, Sam DuBose, Philando Castile, Terrence Kushner, Elton Sterling, Jamar Clark, Jeremy McDowell, William Chapman, Eric Harris, Tamir Rice, Akai Gurley, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Laquan McDonald, Walter Scott, Sandra Bland, Alton Sterling. All 18 of these people were killed in the last 2 years. Killed, and the white officer got away with it. And these have sparked protests and civil unrest in America. This is not just a black phenomenon. In Europe, every time a police kills a civilian, they have a massive protest. And then also Ben Shapiro said the problem is they need to act like human beings. They are human beings. Are you saying that African Americans are not human beings? I think that's such a negative connotation. Just blaming the whole everyone at the riots as people that were not acting like human beings. Obviously, they're acting like human beings. They're emotional. They feel resentment. They have anger. That's a human being feelings. They are acting like human beings, and they are putting their rights for free speech and free assembly, which Ben Shapiro, I think you would advocate, since most of the time you go to speeches, people protest against you, and people are always saying negative things about you. You, of all people, should believe that people have the right to protest and the right to free speech. So I don't know, and they are acting human. They're not inhuman. So I think that was a very negative statement to make, and it was factually untrue. So let's be clear, systemic racism is a corrosive and widespread problem in our society, and we all need to do a better job of confronting it in our towns, in our neighborhoods, in ourselves. And we also need to restore the Voting Act. I didn't know we took it away, but I guess we have to restore the Voting Act. Civil rights movement. Okay. Let's see what else I have here. Okay, so Ben Shapiro said that income inequality is culture, not race. What do you mean by that, Ben? You're saying that if they improved their culture or their way of life, that they would make more money? If you're living in a poor black community, you don't have the opportunities. You don't have jobs nearby. There's no really businesses. There's no stores. The schools are underfunded. You have the poverty of cycle going through because you probably came from you're in a poor neighborhood. Obviously, your parents were poor, your grandparents were poor, and it cycles through. They don't have a really strong role model. Most of the African American children are born without a father, because 77% of African American children are born from unwed mothers, which is a really high rate for unwed mothers. I think this is a problem in the African American communities. I think the girls see that they probably are their mothers were probably unwed mothers too, and they see this as a normal thing in society, that they can have kids without being married. So this is just a recycle of unwed mothers, where their mothers were unwed and their grandmothers were unwed and the great grandmothers. And what this does is that it breaks up the nuclear family. You have an unwed mother, and now she is the sole person. She doesn't have another person to help her. She doesn't have a second income to help her. Most likely she might have dropped out of high school. She didn't go to college, obviously, so she's going to make minimum wage. And when they make minimum wage, sometimes they have to work 2 jobs, and the kids stay at home, and they don't have a mother, and the father's not there. So for the African American boys especially, they don't have a role model to teach them what is right and wrong, and and how to follow. Make sure to follow the law. Make sure you don't break the law, and to understand consequences. And an African American boy will not learn this unless they have a role model. So this is a real problem in the African community where you don't have a father as a role model and you have unwed mothers at 77%. I would highly recommend that they put a Planned Parenthood in these African American communities and you make birth control free. And they should also have sex education in high school. Uh, well, at 7th grade, you start getting your period and you can get pregnant when you're 12 or 13. Um, but they have to start a huge campaign about using birth control pill, and then also they should give African American men free condoms. They're probably not going to buy the condom because if you're poor and a box of condoms is $10, you're going to want the chicken and the rice over the condom. So that's what the disparity is. They should, the African American women should make sure that they understand when you have sex, you might get pregnant, and that's why they need to have sex education. And that all those girls in the high schools should get birth control pill free at the Planned Parenthood, and the men should get free condoms at the Planned Parenthood. This would really help decrease the rate of unwed mothers if they were on birth control, or if the men had condoms. They have to get used to wearing condoms and put up and really advocate and really promote using birth control pill and using condoms so that you don't have this high rate of 77% of unwed mother. This just perpetuates a cycle of not only poverty, but also a unwed mother. An unwed mother has a daughter, and now she sees, oh, my mother was unwed. It's a normal thing, so I guess, she doesn't think anything about sex. Where in my family and a lot of the other families, you have parents that are college educated and that work at a higher job, like a social worker, a doctor, a nurse, or whatever, a professional job. So these African American children don't see that. They don't see their parents educated. They don't see their friends or family going to college, so they don't have good role models. And in their schools, they don't have vocational programs or opportunities to get ready and prepare for college and talk about college because the schools are so poorly funded. These poor schools need more funding than any other schools. They need new schools. They need vocational training. They need that vocational training because we don't want them to go have a baby unwed at minimum wage, because and these children grow up and they end up doing the same thing. They get pregnant when they're not married, and then they have children without a father, which is a big epidemic in the black community, to have a lot of children without a father involved. It's a very traumatic and very sensitive subject when children are not connected to their father and they don't have that nuclear. Even if the father visited them a couple times a week or talked to them a week, that would make children feel more secure and understand to have a father that was part of their life. They need that in the African American community. They need strong fathers in there with their children to support the children, to support the mother, hopefully financially, because obviously she's making minimum wage, and they're just perpetuating the poverty cycle and the unwed mother cycle that needs to stop. So I really advocate to get Planned Parenthood into these African American communities. Not for abortions. Actually, African Americans don't do abortions, obviously, because they have a 77% unwed mothers. But they need pap smears. They need to get tested for STDs. They need to get tested for cancer. They need to get breast examinations. These are preventative causes, and also birth control. It's important for a woman to have pap smears for birth controls, which should be free for African Americans in their community. Free birth control, free condoms, and hopefully this would cut in half the 77% of unwed black mothers. And stop perpetuating the cycle of poverty. We have to break that cycle of poverty and break the cycle of unwed mothers. Somehow in the black African American community, they have to address that. So I'm going to end this video right here, but I have a stack of analysis and statistics to prove that African Americans are disproportionately targeted by police. They are racially profiled in Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit, Florida, New York. There's documented evidence analysis to show that they are disproportionately targeted, and police officers do use excessive force more often on African Americans, and they will kill African Americans at a higher rate, 2.5 times than the white counterparts. So this is just part one. I will come back with part two to explain the analysis and statistics about Black lives in America, and I'm going to have a very different viewpoint and perspective of Black Americans in America. I want to ask Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro, how many Black friends do you have? Who do you associate or socialize with any Black people? I think this is an important, very important question, because I am lucky to have African American friends, also to have African American family members, and I also have white family members. So growing up, I have two different realities of white people versus Black people. When I'm with my African American family members, and actually when I drive around with my stepfather, he's African American, he's Black. We've gotten stopped several times. Just he drives a Mercedes. Just to ask him, I'm thinking like, oh, he got a ticket, or he's speeding ticket or something. No, the police officer just wants to know, where are you going? What are you doing? I'm like, you stop it just to ask us what we're doing and where we're going? That's ridiculous. So that was racial profiling. He sees a Black man in a Mercedes and wants to know why he's in a Mercedes. You compare this to my husband. He's a white Jewish man. We've never been stopped by police to ask us what we're doing and where we're going. So that's a total racial profiling. And also, if I go with my African American families to the store, we walk in and they don't really get acknowledged or welcomed by the employees. They get ignored, and then we get followed around by the security. And I'm thinking, like, why are they following us around? Sometimes they've asked us when we left to check our bags. I'm like, go ahead and check the bags. I don't have anything to hide. But if I want with my white family members, we go into the store and they're like, hey, how you doing? Welcome. Can I show you anything? They get an immediate response, positive response, and they get immediate service, and the security doesn't follow us around. So that's a big difference. Also, if I've gone to a restaurant with my African American family members, we get we get slower service, and we don't get acknowledged by the waitress. Sometimes we sat there not even getting our drinks. In a white family, they came after us already getting their food. And I would say, ma'am, excuse me. I go, we haven't even got our drinks. She goes, oh, I'm so sorry. We're so busy. I'm thinking, you weren't busy enough to take that white people's food to them, and they came after us. So they get slower service, and they don't get acknowledged right away. So yeah, there's a big difference there. If I go with my white family members to the restaurant, we get immediate service. Like if I go with my husband and he's white, we get immediate service, and we get our drinks right away, and we get faster service. In comparison, when I'm with my Black relatives, we get slower service and we get ignored. So there is a big racial disparity, and they do get a unconscious bias, racial bias from stores and restaurants compared to white people. And Ben Shapiro doesn't believe that there's white privilege. There's absolutely white privilege. I've experienced this in my life, being around white people compared to being around Black people. White people get service faster. They get service easier. They don't get harassed. They are acknowledged, and they're welcomed. And when we go into public spaces, and the cops don't stop white men to ask them where they're going and where they're doing. That's only for Black men in a nice car. So Ben Shapiro, I would, if you really want to know what Black Lives Matter or how African Americans feel personally living in America, I would suggest that you have a dialogue with African American people. You have a group of African American people. You have a dialogue with them, and you ask them, how is your life, and how do you perceive life in America as an African American person? That would be the most important thing for you to do, Ben Shapiro, because you're constantly talking about Black Lives Matter in a negative viewpoint, negative perception, but and you constantly give out negative comments about African Americans, and you haven't talked to any African American people about how they feel. Not one person. You should have a dialogue. You should invite African Americans to one of your speeches and ask them and have a dialogue about life in America, and and then you can address those with the African American community, and you can find out how life is for African Americans in America. They feel they're not treated fairly, they're not treated equally, and they've always been discriminated against by police officers, which is actually true. Current data does prove this fact. Anyway, I'm gonna do the next video about the statistics, and that's about it. Thank you. Take care.